updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. Yesterday, Caroline Leavitt, on behalf of the president, offered these remarks in response to the fallout from the Alex Preddy shooting over the weekend, shooting death of Alex Preddy. This is what the White House spokeswoman had to say.
I would also like to address the chaotic scenes in Minnesota over the weekend. Nobody in the White House, including President Trump, wants to see people getting hurt or killed in America's streets. This includes Renee Good, Alex Preddy, the brave men and women of federal law enforcement, and the many Americans who have been victimized at the hands of illegal alien criminals. Saturday's shooting remains under active investigation by Homeland Security Investigations and the FBI. The Customs and Border Protection is also conducting their own internal review. As President Trump said yesterday, the administration is reviewing everything with respect to the shooting, and we will let that investigation play out. But let's be clear about the circumstances which led to that moment on Saturday. This tragedy occurred as a result of a deliberate and hostile resistance by Democrat leaders in Minnesota.
And that's what House Majority Leader Steve Scalise also pointed to in a conversation with Maria Bartiromo yesterday, that there is this local leadership or lack thereof problem in Minnesota that is somewhat distinct from the rest of the nation, although I don't think it's the void of leadership at the state and local level that's so unique as compared to Chicago and Illinois or L.A. and California or Portland and Oregon. I think it has a lot to do with the infrastructure that's been built there, as we discussed earlier, but nonetheless, Scalise.
ICE is in a lot of places around the country and Border Patrol, and you don't have these problems anywhere but Minneapolis. That's because you've got very failed leadership on the ground there, both the mayor and the governor. By the way, go back, remember the Summer of Love, where they let their own city burn down. These are failed leaders.
Those failed leaders had a conversation with President Trump yesterday. Sides expressed or characterized the conversations as productive. President Trump saying that he and Tim Walz were on the same wavelength. If that's true, and I don't really think it is, but if that's true, then I fear what is happening to President Trump. I don't know how you get on the same wavelength with Field Marshal Tim, but it's to the benefit of both sides. I understand the politics to have a conversation and present at least the appearance of trying to work constructively together, even as Tim Walz has an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today talking about the un-American assault on Minnesota by ICE. Okay, so don't expect anything more than pleasantries, particularly now that Tom Homan has been dispatched there, and there's somebody you're not going to mess with, particularly on the substance of the law. Nobody better than Tom Homan, and that is the vast improvement over what we've been getting from Kristi Noem. That is overdue. John Hinderaker, president of the Center of the American Experiment, contributor to Powerline, powerlineblog.com, is on the ground in Minnesota. That's where he is. That's where Center of the American Experiment is located. John, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be with you, Dan.
So, give us your take, I guess, starting with the Walz and Fry conversations with the president.
Well, what we're seeing here in Minnesota, first of all, Dan, is an insurrection, and it's being supported and led from the top, and that means Tim Walz, his Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, a hardcore left-winger, Jacob Fry, and other members of the DFL party. And they are trying to create a jurisdiction here in Minnesota where federal law does not govern. And that's what they want. I mean, it is literally an insurrection. And so,
well, they want
Walz
ICE
had
out.
a conversation with Donald Trump, and Trump put out kind of a conciliatory Truth Social post. You quoted part of it; they're on the same wavelength. Walz put out a statement saying that it looks like Trump is folding, and he's going to pull ICE out of Minneapolis. We win. It was that kind of triumphant thing. And I think it was in response to that Caroline Leavitt gave the press conference, and you played a tape of part of it, and she conveyed several demands that she says President Trump is making on Tim Walz and the others here in Minnesota. And basically the demands are that local law enforcement cooperate with ICE, as law enforcement does cooperate with ICE almost everywhere around the country. So that's the president's position. As you said, he's sending Tom Homan here. We'll see how it plays out, but I don't think there's any prospect of things changing in the immediate future.
And the right, so the insurrection. I mean, first of all, when you say abolish ICE when you say ICE get out, well, I mean, by definition, you don't want to enforce federal law because you want federal law enforcement out. So who's going to enforce it? Nobody. Who's going to remove people in this country that pose public safety threats or are convicted criminals? Nobody. That's what they're saying. It's just so they're just using like abolish ICE and get ICE out, and they sort of want you to forget what the point of all this is, and this is where refocus is required.
That's right, Dan. And I think what's important for our listeners to understand is we're not talking here about peaceful protests, as Governor Walz and others keep saying. What we're seeing here is a military-style, highly organized effort to disrupt law enforcement and make it impossible to enforce federal law. And these people, there are I don't know how many of them, hundreds if not maybe thousands of them, they communicate on these allegedly secure signal groups, which have now been broken, and a lot has been learned about how they're doing this. But they actively interfere with the ICE officers, which is a federal crime. They use their vehicles to block streets so that ICE can't get where they're trying to go or can't leave once they get there. They go around warning illegals that ICE is on the way and flee and so forth. So a lot of what they're doing actually is criminal. And this applies to that
biting
guy,
off
Alex
fingers.
Reddy, who got shot on Saturday. He committed multiple crimes, and in the end, resisting arrest and foolishly fighting with multiple federal law enforcement folks while being armed. It's unbelievable.
Well, right.
And that's what led to his getting shot.
Right. I mean, the whole thing, it just was, it got lost in part. I mean, it's so frustrating because of Kristi Noem and the Kristi Noem's communication and some of the others too. But the bottom line is, I don't know. I have no reason to believe that Alex Preddy was a bad guy. So I'm just looking at his behavior. And his behavior was he interfered between an officer and a suspect, then resisted arrest. And now we see new video that was out yesterday that's got more of a straight-on shot with ICE officers surrounding him. Now, this isn't necessarily dispositive. The good news, apparently, is that there were several ICE officers who had body cameras that were active, so we're going to see more video at some point. But now we see on the ground yesterday him with his cell phone in his left hand, but then while he's on the ground resisting, he reaches around behind his back, like towards his waistband, which is where the gun was, as we understand. Again, the reporting on this. So so still trying to piece this together. But the the illegal execution, the murder on the street that's being characterized really actually doesn't in fact comport with what people see if they are looking with eyes that are fair-minded.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's an absurd narrative, and I think before the video always starts rolling too late. The people with their iPhones, they start filming after an altercation is underway, so you never see what led to the altercation. But as I understand it, as more information comes out, this guy Preddy was one of the people who were actively engaged in trying to interfere with the work of law enforcement, for example, by directing vehicles to block the streets, so ICE can't get through. So these are not innocent, peaceful protesters. This is an organized and well-funded military-style resistance operation, and it is being endorsed and led from the top as part of what I think you can fairly call an insurrection.
Well, here again, I mean, I mentioned this earlier in the program, but get your reaction to this. This post from a Green Beret named Eric Schwalm going viral. He writes, as a former Special Forces warrant officer with multiple rotations running counterinsurgency ops, both hunting insurgents and trying to separate them from sympathetic populations, I've seen organized resistance up close. From Anbar to Helmand, the pattern is familiar. Spotters, cutouts, dead drops, or modern equivalents, discipline comms, role specialization, and a willingness to absorb casualties while bleeding the stronger force slowly. And he goes on to provide more detail in terms of the parallels between what we're all seeing in terms of the physical evidence being publicized, and he takes these puzzle pieces and puts them together and says, this is very similar to what I saw in theaters of battle where we're doing counterinsurgency ops, and you don't address this through de-escalation. That's not going to work, because you de-escalate doesn't mean they will. That's sort of his point here in terms of you better understand what you're dealing with this, because this is pretty scary stuff happening on the streets of America.
Well, that's absolutely right, Dan. The other thing is these signal chats have been infiltrated, and
Yes.
and there have been major downloads of these supposedly secret communications among the people who have organized the insurrection, and you know they have shifts. They actually have people going on and off duty, and they follow federal vehicles around. They keep track of license plate numbers, and they're sometimes wrong. You know, they've destroyed multiple vehicles that they thought were ICE vehicles when they weren't. They attacked somebody who was a federal prison employee, mistakenly thinking that he was an ICE officer. They go to hotels where they think ICE people are staying. I have no idea if they're right or wrong, and they smash windows and they spray paint obscenities. They assault people. One ICE officer yesterday had part of a finger bitten off.
Yeah.
By one of these people. I mean, this is no peaceful protest. This is an insurrection. It's a military-style effort, and as you say, it's analogous to insurrections we've seen in various places in the Third World.
That was a mostly peaceful bite, though, the finger that got bit. John, so what about the fraud piece of this, too? Because in his True Social post, Trump also sort of reframed, I haven't forgotten about the $9 to $19 billion in alleged fraud. Dr. Oz was on site looking at that Griggs Midway building, filming that Griggs Midway building, and all these home healthcare companies there billing Medicaid $400 million. Bessent is talking about it. And Patel is talking about following the money, Cash is, with respect to the organized insurrection, as you called it. What is your sense about the investigation subpoenas being issued to Ellison, to Fry, to Walsh? The investigation into the fraud piece of this, do you see this advancing?
Well, I sure hope so, Dan. I think part of what's going on here is that the Democrats are trying to drive fraud off the front pages of the newspapers by mounting this insurrection, and they've succeeded in that. You know, everybody's kind of forgotten about the frauds because they're focused on what's happening in the streets, and I think that's a big part of the intent. You know, Tim Walz was forced. He wanted to run for re-election. He announced, he filed, to run for a third term, but the National Democratic Party forced him out of the race, and they substituted Amy Klobuchar, currently a senator, I'm sure against her will. You know, she's coming back to Minnesota now to run for governor, and they did that because the fraud facts are so bad, they're so terrible. We're talking about $10 billion or more stolen from taxpayers on Tim Walz's watch, that they thought it was untenable for Walz to run for re-election. So what I want to see happen is for the streets to quiet down and let's start talking about the frauds again.
I want to get your local knowledge on this other matter that's really being played out by the D.C. press corps for obvious reasons. This Chris Medell, a Republican candidate for governor, who dropped his bid for governor, saying he could no longer run under the Republican banner because this situation is out of control on the ground with ICE or something like that. Can you give us the backstory on him?
Well, I know Chris, okay? He's a good lawyer, but he is a lifelong Democrat, and this whole, he knows nothing about politics. this run for governor as a Republican was a vanity effort on his part, and now dropping out of the race and blasting the Republican Party might help him to get some legal business. I don't know. But as I say, Chris Mattel contributed to the Joe Biden Victory Fund in 2024, okay? He is not and never has been a Republican.
It sounds like, I know, we got some Illinois Republicans like that, too. You won't be surprised to learn. That's perfect. That's exactly what I want to know. That's what it felt like. But, of course, that sort of reporting is not included in what we're getting from the Amazon Post and the New York Times and so forth. That's why we wanted to check it out with you. John Hinderaker, president of the Center of the American Experiment, contributor to Powerline, powerlineblog.com. John, thank you as always.
Great to be with you, Dan.
You too. And John joined us here at Chicago's Morning Answer.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Chicagoland certified financial planning professional Tim Stearns discusses taxes in retirement.
Most people are paying more